Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to the Westport Library. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the library. I'd like to begin by saying what an honor it is for me and our staff to be able to celebrate the life and work of Stephen Wilkes, an artist of great renown and, of course, remarkable talent. During my tenure here at the library, I've had the pleasure of hosting many notable exhibits by our fabulous local artists, but this latest exhibit, Visualizing Time, is very thought-provoking and inspiring for me. Visualizing Time explores how Wilkes' concept of time has changed from the early days of his career through his latest series, Day to Night and Tapestries. Can a photograph inspire and create change? Well, for Stephen and his work, the answer is definitely yes. Mr. Wilkes is a master at taking a specific location and bringing it to life through the lens of his camera. His 5-year photographic study of Ellis Island, for example, and its abandoned medical ward secured $6 million toward the restoration of the south side of the island. His work documenting the ravages of Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy has brought heightened awareness to global climate change and those realities. And perhaps in his most defining work, Day to Night, Stephen captures life's fleeting moments in iconic places like New York's Coney Island, Moscow's Red Square, as well as Arizona's Grand Canyon. Vast and extraordinarily detailed, Day to Night not only captures location, but rather a day in the life of location. With shifting light and shadows that move across the frame, the final results are epic panoramas of life and earth in motion. Stitching together thousands of successive snapshots, Stephen's images can literally convey thousands of stories, all coexisting in a single frame. The pictures become portraits not only of historic landmarks, but also of group behavior, a random incident, as well as our humble routines. They are a compilation of landscapes, street scenes, color, architecture, and history. So Stephen, on behalf of all of us, thank you for sharing with us a new way of seeing and for creating a timeless window into our world through these magical moments within your work. Joining Stephen tonight in discussion is Stacy Bass. Stacy is a staunch supporter of the library. In fact, she was president of the library board of trustees. She's a loyal friend and a talented photographer. She is a lover of landscapes, botanica, travel, lifestyle, and all things design. In fact, if you are a garden lover, her coffee table book, Garden at First Light, is a must-have for your book collection, so I would encourage you to seek that out. Stacy, let me turn the discussion over to you and Stephen.
Can everyone hear me?
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, good.
So you can see that we each got the memo, like dressed like an artist. It's totally accidental that we're wearing the same outfit.
But it works, it works.
It does work. So before we jump into this conversation, I just wanted to provide a little context about how I know Stephen. In 1988, the year I graduated college, I was 21. I went to the Maine Photographic Workshops, now known as the Maine Media Workshops. And I took a seminar with the great Jay Maisel, who was and is, I guess in some ways, Stephen's mentor. Mine, but less so. And that was the first time I'd heard about Stephen. It was sort of the beginning of the legend of Stephen Wilkes. And then a couple of years later, as a budding photographer, I sat in an auditorium, not unlike this one, at the Photo Expo at the Javits Center in New York City. And did you know this? No. And I sat in the auditorium listening to Stephen present, which I think was mostly work about China, if I'm remembering correctly. Wow. But what I do remember most, I don't remember the images as much as I remember the feeling, which was, sort of mouth agape, eyes wide, head spinning, look at this work, look at this incredible man. And I think I was really blown away at that moment, like really, really blown away by that moment. And it was obvious that his passion and prowess for his craft was sort of unparalleled. So fast forward to almost present day, Westport, Connecticut, maybe about 10 years ago, I discovered that Stephen ended up living in my hometown. So what a wonderful delight that was. And through social media and some common friends, we ended up connecting. And then more recently, I had the opportunity to, I don't want to, collaborate might be too strong of a word, but be a part of the experience of having a very personal date night constructed by Stephen last summer. And through that process and the time that I spent with Stephen and with Betty, I think it's really wonderful to say that this is a very full circle moment for me, to go from a young woman starting my career to a much older woman in my hometown, but interviewing someone who I respect so much, not just as a fan, which I was and will always be, but also as a friend. So welcome to, or welcome back to the Westport Library, everybody.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm just honored to be sharing the stage with you, and you're just a special, special person.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening, and Bill, thank you for those lovely comments about my work, and I think
let's dive
in, shall we?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, though your body of work is very broad, we're focusing here today on three main bodies of work and how they intersect, really. Visualizing time is about light and history and legacy and memory. I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about how the Ellis Island project began, and Bill referred to it as well. It was shot over 5 years from 1988 to 2003.
Exactly.
Tell us what the impetus was, how did this project begin, and a little bit more details about that.
Well, it started in 1998. Was actually it was going to be a one-day assignment, actually about a 1-hour assignment, and it became a 5-year passion project because as soon as I walked into this place, I had to figure out how could I be there and how could I document it. I couldn't get it out of my blood, and so I spent every free moment I had going out to the island. I got connected with the New York Landmark Conservancy. And a wonderful friend named Mark Weber, who was able to basically open a door. And I did a film that the New York Landmark Conservancy used and presented to Congress, and we raised the $6.5 million to stabilize it as a living room. And because I was able to do that, they allowed me this unique access into this place. So whenever I wanted to go, I could just go and spend the entire day out there.
How much time do you think how many different times did you go there over the 5 years to shoot?
Well, I probably about anywhere from 50 to 75 times over the 5-year period. And, one of the things about this is you have to realize this place was basically closed off to almost anyone because it was filled with asbestos and lead paint. So when I made these photographs, I had to wear a respirator most of the time. And it was very, very challenging working conditions. But I was just completely in awe of what I was feeling. And my mother had come through Ellis Island as a child, as a 9-year-old, by herself. She arrived by boat with nothing but a teddy bear in her arms with all her family belongings sewed into it. And so I always identified with this place in a unique way. And I felt, in a strange way, I connected with sort of the memories and something was in the light that I felt in all these empty rooms. I could almost feel a sense of humanity in every room I photographed. And I never ever did architectural photography before I did this. It was the first time I had ever really done architectural photography. But what I started to realize these were much more than just pictures of empty rooms. I was feeling the spirits that actually resonated in these rooms. And as the more work I did, the more things kept happening. Like I would suddenly discover, every time I showed up into a room, it was as if I was being guided. The light was just perfect, So many times people ask me, so how did you get that picture? Well, I walked in and that's exactly what the light was doing, That's how I got that picture. But on Ellis, literally, that's exactly the way it happened. It wasn't a normal sort of thread the way I photograph, which would be I find something interesting, I go, I'm going to come back tomorrow morning because the moon will be setting over here, or there's certain relationships we look at as photographers. But my work in Ellis was about literally as if I was guided to the specific moment when it happened.
So in addition to the physical challenges of working with a respirator and things like that, what were the technical difficulties that were involved?
Well, I was shooting with film, 4x5 film, transparency film. And, it's, as many of you know, whoever shot film know that you don't have a lot of latitude. You have to be just perfect. And to get shadow details and highlights and all these kinds of things, the range of tone that you see in my photographs, I actually created a zone system using film during this time period. And so I always say that I was lucky enough to be at a level in terms of my technical ability to take advantage of what I was seeing for the first time. So that was a really important element of my work is that I was, so many times you get to a place and you go, oh, I wish I could shoot that again the way I am now because I know so much more.
Right.
But I was just lucky enough to get to Ellis and see it and be able to technically deliver on it. And it was through that process, I think, that I think really, Ellis for me was a benchmark in many, many ways. But I think it was a benchmark not just in terms of what technically I was doing, but also in many ways, this is when ruin photography was just becoming a thing. And I think people saw it as art for the first time, at least in my work. And for me, it was also about storytelling. I think I wanted you to feel not just the patina and the light and the texture that I was capturing in these rooms, but I wanted you to feel the humanity that I felt in these empty spaces. And I'm not a ghost guy, and I never really understood that, but I'm an energy guy. And I started out my work as a street photographer. And I found that when I would walk through these hallways and I'd walk into these rooms, I was feeling the energy like I feel on the street. And if I see you on the street, I can actually read your energy. I can sense when you say, like I can tell, okay, you're into me taking your picture. Or I read when you don't want me to take your picture. And that's a nuance that all great street photographers really have. It's like a hunter, it's an instinct. And so I wanted to have that instinct. And as I developed it, that's what the work really started to speak to.
Can you give us a sense, this is sort of a nice overview of what Ellis Island looks like. Can you just kind of walk people through where you were shooting?
Yeah, so if the foreground area here you're looking at, that's where corridor number 9 is, and that was the first picture I showed. That was the cover of my book, Ellis Island Goes to Freedom. And this was the infectious disease hospital. And just a little bit of background, this hospital was the largest infectious disease hospital built in the world. Every known infectious disease that ever came to America had to enter through this hospital. And so it has an enormous history, one that's frankly not really been written or talked about anywhere near as much as the other part of this picture, which is the top part. That's the Great Hall of Ellis Island. And that's what everybody thinks of as Ellis Island. But Ellis Island is actually 3 islands. Island 1, which is the Great Hall, and Islands 2 and 3, which is what I focused on. Those are the infectious disease hospitals on the bottom, and then of course the psychiatric hospital. And what you have to realize is that when I got to the island in 1998, it was so overgrown that you could not even see the buildings as you pulled up by boat. That's how completely, it was 50% nature and 50% the work of man, literally entangled in this perfect harmony. And I think that's part of the power of the work, to be frank, is that I just was lucky enough to capture that magic. But I think for me, it established this idea that I was looking at memory, I was reflecting on time, and I was also storytelling. And so I think when we look at
sort of the trifecta.
The trifecta,
yeah.
It has, I don't think I do day to night without Ellis Island. It was that important in terms of my growth and development as a photographer. So
actually on that note, let's talk a little bit about some of your other artistic influences, some of the things that, sort of the stepping stones, if you will, to get to the place that you made your mind open up to the possibilities of day to night.
Well, and that's an interesting thing. Everyone always asks me, how did you come up with this idea? So I was a real student of art history when I was a young man, and I had a wonderful teacher who I'm still friendly with. At 14 years old, she took me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But one of the things I got involved in was I was fascinated by Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. And I became fascinated by painters that created epic landscapes and that had these storytelling abilities. And I'll never forget when I saw this painting at MoMA, and I walked in and just completely was blown away by what is, in my mind, the greatest landscape painter of all time, which was Jan Bruegel the Elder. And as I looked at the painting, I just felt like, my God, there are all these stories going on in this painting. And I just thought it was so fascinating that you could tell stories and capture an epic landscape combined into one. And so that really stayed in my mind. And then I started to study the Hudson River School painters. Albert Bierstadt I became obsessed with. And Bierstadt, like all the Hudson River School painters, if you look at the painting, the first thing people describe is the light, the light, the light. And so, yeah, it is about the light. But what I began to understand as I looked more and more into it was that they were painting light moving, and that's why the light was so dimensional. And so Thomas Cole, I became a huge fan of. These men were out there painting for 18 hours, and they were cherry picking moments based on time, and they literally melded them together. So there's a dimensionality in the Hudson River School that I believe comes from the movement of light in painting. And that's something I became very, very curious about. And then Monet, of course, his wonderful, the church, oh my God, in the Rouen series that he did, the beautiful church in Paris. And he painted it in daytime, and then he painted it at night. And I became fascinated by the fact that he had this patience to look and keep looking, and that it was like these studies that he would do over time. And I think that affected me, that
Sure.
like this idea that something can go from day to night, and that it was so beautiful, he wanted to create a separate painting of it. And in a strange way, I think that's what happened to me. Day to night kind of came about because I found my first location in New York. I couldn't decide if I liked day or night better, and I ended up coming up with the concept. That's kind of how it happened. But
I would love for you to tell us
this
story.
I'll tell you, this story was kind of fun. When I first did Day to Night and it started getting a lot of traction, a gentleman wrote me an email and he sent a JPEG of this photograph. He goes, "Stephen, were you ever inspired by La Lumiere series by Magritte?" And I looked at the painting and I had forgotten, as a child, I grew up, and my dad had put that poster over my bed. And and all of a sudden, it was like this amazing confluence where I had been imprinted in a way with Day to Night. But for me, it was just a cool painting. I never looked at it as like day and night. But it was this amazing kind of confluence where, and I think that's where creativity works, is that there are all these things that they're like sparks, creativity is like a storm. And, you have these electrical charges, and then all of a sudden there's this bolt of lightning, and then bang, you get that smoke, and that's where the idea happens. And I think that's what happened to me. I had a spark, and it really happened for me. Life magazine commissioned me to capture Baz Luhrmann's film Romeo and Juliet, and they asked me to do homage to what was called the Big Picture, which was done in the 1940s when they would photograph the entire cast and crew. So I had Baz Luhrmann, set up the whole thing help me, and of course that's Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Life wanted me to do it as a panoramic, and the set was a square. So I was inspired by David Hockney at the time to create a photo collage. That's what Hockney was doing. In the mirror, I saw that there's a reflection of Claire Danes and Leonardo. And for that one photograph, I asked them, would you guys just kiss for this one picture? And when I came back and I put the image together, it was like this aha moment, because I realized I was changing time in a photograph, and that was the seed for the idea. And then 16 years later, a thing called Photoshop was invented, and I could do it seamlessly. I saw that there's a reflection of Claire Danes and Leonardo. And for that one photograph, I asked them, would you guys just kiss for this one picture? And when I came back and I put the image together, it was like this aha moment, because I realized I was changing time in a photograph, and that was the seed for the idea. And then 16 years later, a thing called Photoshop was invented, and I could do it seamlessly. So the work really started as a love letter to New York. And I think, I mean, my work is really about art and science, I think. You saw the art side, right? Now I'm going to show you a little bit the science that, in the way I thought about how I create what I create. So what I do is, basically, it's called a time vector. I decide where day begins and night ends. And this time vector can go from left to right, it can go up and down on the y-axis, or it can even travel diagonally on the z-axis. And, you know, I remember reading a book about Einstein, and he described time as a fabric. And it was really weird because I see time as a grid and a fabric as well. And this is the idea that time gets bent by gravity. And I take that fabric that Einstein described so beautifully, and I flatten it into a two-dimensional plane. And this is what I call a master plate. So this is a picture that I've decided where day begins and night ends. You saw that in the first slide. You can see, obviously, that you see the beach lit up, it's bright and sunny, and you see the amusement park is completely at night. I build a plate based on my time vector, and then what I do is I capture specific moments that happened in time, where they were, and then I seamlessly blend those moments into the master plate. And this process can take months of work, literally months. Because when you go and look at my prints, you will see how seamless they are. It literally looks like just a single photograph. You don't really realize quickly that time is changing. And as you look closer, the more you see, as I like to say. But it's really creating this harmony, you know, between these very discordant worlds. That's really what I'm most challenging about what my
Which was the very first day tonight? Was that the one with Jody
that was
on
the High Line.
Can you tell that story quickly? It's such a, I think, really illustrative story.
Sure. Well, it was just a really kind of an amazing thing. I had gotten this assignment from New York Magazine, and Jody Kwan was the photo editor, called me up. They said, Stephen, we want you to do the definitive photograph of the High Line. And I go, oh, that's great, cool. I remember seeing it. I thought it was super cool. I went out on it, and one of the things I noticed was when you're on the High Line, you have this unique perspective into the city. You can look up at people's windows and actually see people in their own apartments, and you could recognize a friend on the street corner. It has this strange scale of being, as a New Yorker, being on the High Line itself. And so I felt like if I'm going to do a definitive picture, I had to capture that in the photograph. I wanted to make a photograph that related to the scale that you see and feel when you're on the High Line. So I scouted rooftops, balconies. I was scouting every place. I couldn't get the angle I wanted. And finally, I said to the photo editor, the only way I can do this, I have to get a crane. And I've got to get close enough where I can be intimate, but still capture the breadth of the High Line. That's how I'm going to tell the picture. And they said, great, go ahead, do it. So I scouted it at night, I scouted it at day, and then I remember having this phone call, and my wife, Betty, my beautiful wife, who, by the way, all of these pictures don't exist without Betty. So let's just, she should stand, honey, just say hi, because as so many of my friends, dear friends that are here in the audience tonight know, she is the backbone of everything and makes everything click. I get to float through life because Betty is my anchor. So that's the truth. So I say she's the milk in my coffee. So love you. We ended up, I fell in love with it at night. I fell in love with it at noontime when everybody's eating lunch, floating, High Line floats over 10th Avenue. And so what ended up happening was I get on the phone, and Betty's sitting behind me, and I say to the photo editor on the phone, you know, it'd be kind of interesting. What do you think if I change time, day to night, north to south on the High Line? And she was like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. Could you do that? And I go, I don't know, I can try. And that's how it happened, literally. And that was the first one. And then after I did that, there was this wild reaction to this photograph. And then they called me up and said, could you do another one like vertical for Christmas? And that's how I did, yeah. And so, and subsequently, so the whole series really blossomed in New York from that one assignment. And I became very passionate. And this was, of course, 2010. This was 9/11. They let me shoot on 9/11. And when that happened, I knew I could really get something. I knew that Fifth Avenue at night, I would get the memorial lights on. And that became a really, really important feature in the photograph. And for me, it's a picture that really reflects on the whole idea as New Yorkers of what we survived. But life has gone on. We've moved forward. And so I wanted an image that reflected that kind of optimism in a way.
And then at what point did things, this is one of my favorite of all time.
So, I started to shoot seasons. This was one of my all-time greatest, snow scenes I've ever seen. I can't tell you. This is almost 18 inches of snow. And it actually was a day that the wind did not blow all the snow off the trees at sunset. And it was just a magical, mystical kind of photograph of New York, and one I'm still in love with. I then went to Times Square, and a lot of my work has become kind of history in a way, and I didn't think when I was shooting it was going to become historical. But you don't see cabs like this in New York anymore because of Uber. So it was a fascinating, what I started to realize the more I started doing this work was that I was seeing things and I was getting to tell stories, but I was actually, in many ways, when people see my work, it's a deeper representation of what a place is like than a single photograph, because you have a much richer context to really what happens over time.
It's also how people lived in that day.
Exactly.
You get
time
frame.
Yeah. And of course the Brooklyn Bridge. And then this, just to give you an idea, and you guys see this when you walk up to my prints, but this is really what my work looks like up close. I'm a storyteller, and I'm essentially a street photographer from 40 feet in the air. For this photograph, I was in a crane for 18 hours. And I was underneath the Manhattan Bridge, listening to the B&D train hammer my head for 18 hours. I cannot tell you the headache I had afterwards.
So I think
it was worth it.
People wonder, I know the answer, but you should share, are any of these things orchestrated?
No, when I say I'm a street photographer, I just react to things that are in front of the lens. I never know what's going to happen in front of me. And people always say to me, how do you pay attention for 18 hours? I can't watch TV for 18 hours. Well, for me, I'm so afraid of missing a moment that I'm hyper-focused. And my eye moves as time moves. So once I decide where day begins and night ends, my focus moves through the scene like that. So I'm thinking about very specific moments as time is changing. Right. And that couple jumping in the middle, I saw them set up the camera. They set up a self-timer. If you look closely at that picture, you literally will see the camera, and they had 10 seconds, and I knew I could count 10 seconds.
Right.
I was waiting, and they had no idea that they're one of the centerpieces of my work.
Can you describe, let's do this one, I don't know if you remember exactly, how many images did you shoot over the 18 hours, and how many were incorporated in the final
So on
image?
average, I shoot anywhere from 12 to, my most recent one, I'm embarrassed to say, I shot 5,000 images. That's the most I think I've ever shot. But it's, and I don't mean embarrassed, but I mean, it's like, when so much stuff is going on, I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. I'm ravenous. So what do I describe it? I'm a, just relentless collector of magical moments. That's what I do. And so, yeah, and I take out of those 1,600 or 2,000 or 5,000 images, I always edit to about 50. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a few more, but 50 is about an average for creating one of these photographs. So this is where the work kind of pivoted. I went from New York to doing international photographs. And I was commissioned by the United States Embassy in Canada to create a photograph of Canada 150 as a gift to the Canadian government. And so I had this amazing access, and I was able to make this picture. And one of the great honors was it was displayed in the National Gallery of Art in Ottawa. And while I was there getting a private tour, someone came up to me and said, oh, you have to wait right here. Someone is here to see you and they want to see you. And it turns out it's the Prime Minister and his wife, Trudeau. And they literally spend 20 minutes with me flipping out over this print. And one of the great moments for me was, and I mean this sincerely, because when people who live in a place get what I do and they say what I captured is exactly their memory of what it was, well, the Prime Minister and his wife looked at this photograph and they said every single memory of this day lives in my photograph for them. So that was an incredible, a huge compliment, yeah. So it was really special. And of course, King Charles is actually in this photograph. You can see him riding up now, yeah. The sad day today, the Queen dying, and but now he's king. But you actually see the story of him arriving, getting out of his coach. So a lot of storytelling in all my pictures. Of course, this is the Tournelle Bridge in Paris. And like, people always ask me, how come there are always brides and grooms, they're getting married? Because I shoot these iconic places, everybody likes to get married there. And for some reason, I'm always getting brides and grooms in my photographs, so.
So in a picture like this, where it doesn't have to be a specific day, can you give everyone a sense of how did you pick the day? Obviously had to align with your schedule.
I always look at weather. I mean, winds. There are a lot of factors that I go through. Believe it or not, this was a miserable day. In fact, my wife Betty said to me, she was convinced it was going to be a complete bust. I went out. It was drizzling, rainy, really bad. But I go for it. So I always go for it because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And sure enough, magic happened. The sky opened like this. And then if you look at Notre Dame, one of the things people always comment about this picture is the light, the glowing light. What you're seeing is I lit Notre Dame. I did almost 30-minute exposures to give you an idea how long this picture took to create. So for 30 minutes, I would wait for these boats to come at night. And when the boats come across at night, they actually throw light onto Notre Dame. So I used the natural boat lighting to paint light onto Notre Dame. Notre Dame does not have the kind of beautiful shaping light that it has in my photograph, but that's because of the way I used these natural elements in the scene to actually become, work in a way.
Incredible.
And then, of course, Stonehenge.
Tell us about the...
So Stonehenge, people always go like, how did you get people? I thought they don't allow people. You're right, they don't allow people in Stonehenge anymore. Turns out that we took months to clear this location, and I'm there with a guy who literally brings the presidents in when they visit Stonehenge. And he's looking at me, and I'm like going, oh my God, who are these people? They're dressed in these Gothic outfits. It looks like something out of Dark Shadows. Anybody remember that TV show? And I'm like going, what's going on? And they're these Gothic dresses, and there's a photographer, and he's got the cape on and the whole thing. And it turns out, he goes, I can't believe you're getting this. I go, what? He goes, once a year we have a pagan wedding, and it's right now, and you're getting it. So I was like, just luck, dumb luck. I've been very blessed. I'm very lucky. I am truly very lucky. So my assistants think I have some kind of weird halo on my head, but I don't know what to expect. But this is, of course, Venice. This is shot from the Piazza San Marco. There's a beautiful bell tower. And so I spent about 24 hours on top of that doing this picture. And Venice was just a wonderful place to photograph. This is one of my favorite storytelling pictures. I've always been drawn to the paleo, and I wanted to make this photograph, but this was as difficult as it gets.
Yeah.
Because you can see time changes from left to right. So morning is on the left, you see the lights on, you see the sun rising, and then you actually see how, they bring the horses out to get a feel for the track. And then you see there's a mass going on at the church in the middle, and then suddenly the parade starts. And then on this far right side here, you're actually seeing the way the horses are pulling up. That's the official start of the race, but it was a false start. So the next group of horses behind is the actual start. And then as time changed, that is the winning contrada, crossing the finish line, and the people are going berserk. Now understand, I shot 18 hours, and that race took 90 seconds. And I will recommend to all of you, there's a wonderful film called Paleo, and the director of the film came and he introduced himself to me because he fell in love with my photograph. And I was inspired by his film, and he just said to me, oh, this is one of the greatest storytelling pictures I've ever seen. And his wife keeps elbowing him, and he says, honey, tell him, well, I directed the film, The Paleo. I go, oh my God, it inspired me. And he said, let me tell you, you got it so right. And we started talking about how there's a whole, they're trying to buy each other during the race. They're actually trying to make deals, they're trying to buy each other's, it's like the whole thing is set up and fixed. And so my biggest fear was I have 90 seconds, but the sun's setting. If they keep negotiating and don't get to the start line, I'm gonna run out of light to do the picture. So that's basically what happened.
It's amazing.
And then you can't do Italy without, going to the Vatican and shooting Easter Mass. This was a dream for years.
And there was also divine intervention.
Divine intervention. I can get no headway. The Vatican will never answer, doesn't respond. And suddenly on Facebook, I get this direct message from a priest in the Vatican, and he's in love with my day-to-night work, and he's doing this little book, and he wants to use my Paris image in his little book, and would it be okay? And I said, of course it would be okay. Let me send you JPEG. I said, but maybe you can help me. I said, I've been trying to do a day-to-night of Easter Mass, and he goes, that's a fantastic idea. I said, oh, great. He said, let me help you. I can get you a location. I can clear everything. He finds this location. And just to give you an idea, I love going to museums in places where I photograph. And I went to the Vatican Museum prior to making this picture. And there's only one drawing, historical drawing of Vatican City in the entire Vatican Museum. It was done from several hundred years ago. And what did you guess? It's a panoramic, and it's exactly from this angle. So I call this my Where's Waldo of Pope Francis. So he appears 10 times in this photograph. And, you know, he actually has a copy of this image. One of the other great stories about this picture was the curator for TED, who's become a friend of mine, was trying to help me. He has a lot of connections within the Vatican, and he couldn't get me access. And one day, we got the picture, and I sent it to him just as a lark. By the way, I finally made the photograph, and he sends me a note immediately. Oh my God, Stephen, we have to talk. And he says to me, you can't say anything to anybody, but you're never gonna believe who the guest speaker is this year. I go, who? The Pope. He goes, guess what? He goes, I want to use your photograph to open for the Pope. And I'm going, oh my God. And I'm thinking about my father, you know, who passed away. If he could have been here for this moment, nice Jewish boy from Long Island opens for the Pope. You know, it doesn't get much better than that. So, and this is Rio. I was on a lifeguard stand where every lifeguard was getting high for like 16 hours. And so I'm glad nobody had any issues in the water, because I would have been going in otherwise. And then this is a beautiful place, magical place called Dichen. And I found the picture of this online, and I go, oh, look at the guy. He took the Karst Mountains from, you know, Guilin, and then he put waterfalls in it. Very clever. And then I go, wait a second. I saw another picture.
Real.
It's real. And I just got obsessed with it. I said, I've got to do a day-to-night there. It's like Shangri-La. And I found, this is from one corner of a hotel. This is the only place you could get this view from. I found this hotel room. So this was like a luxury. You know, normally I don't have bathrooms. I'm sure there are going to be questions about that, but we'll save that for another day. But this was a luxury shoot as far as day-to-nights go, yeah. And then this, of course, is Jennings Beach, and this is part of the collection now in the Fairfield Museum. And now,
yeah, so before we talk about the national parks, there's this wonderful podcast called Spark and Fire, where they interview creatives about their process and their inspiration. And I remember listening to the one that you did on the plane home from Palm Springs, which was the thing that inspired me to reach out about the day-to-night.
Oh, yeah.
And the quote that I really love is, you say, curiosity is the car I drive, and purpose is the fuel.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to sort of talk about how that relates to this next body of work, both the national parks and then moving on to wildlife as well, because I think obviously it's very fitting.
No, I totally appreciate your connecting to that, because it is really what drives my work now, is purpose. And so when I started, the National Parks Project came about. It was the 100th anniversary, and I pitched the Geographic on this idea of paying really homage to the great masters like, Carlton Watkins and Edward Muybridge, who used, new technology in photography, the Mammoth camera, to capture our national parks and tell them, show them in a way that really inspired people. And so I pitched them on this idea, and they ended up buying it. And so this was my first cover in 2016 of Yosemite for National Geographic. And this was a big moment for me, because the Geographic is this bastion of iconic photojournalism. And for them to embrace what I was doing as a photographer, because day to night for me has always been, I'm a traditionalist in terms of the way I work as a photographer, and in terms of I hand-cock a lens, I stand there and I wait. It's what I do after the picture's made that is so revolutionary really in terms of technology and the concept of compressing time in a photograph. And I think they saw that I was using all the traditional values of photography, but I was pushing the medium forward. And that as a storyteller, I was going to communicate things that they couldn't tell with conventional storytelling, single photographs.
And actually, to go back to that for a second.
Oh, sure.
I think it's important to note that you went and took this picture without them.
Yes, so this is one that I actually, and it's a really important point. I pitched the Geographic this idea. They were nervous, they weren't sure it was gonna be just right. So I went out and created this photograph on my own, because I believed I had something. And when I did this picture, I finished it, I sent it to the photo editor, Sarah Lean at National Geographic, and within like 3 minutes, I got an email back. How do we gotta do this. We want you to do a whole, like, she just completely flipped out when they saw this photograph. So it was really exciting because they were really excited by what happened. And Sarah became a big champion of my work early on.
I just think that's an important lesson for
Oh, absolutely.
aspiring creatives, that
you have
if
to do
someone
stuff.
says no and you believe in something, you have to
put your money where your mouth is. That's what I always say, I mean, you're your own best investment, right? I think that's the truth, and that's what I've always believed. And thankfully, my wife Betty believes that with me too.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, yes. So then, they said, okay, could you do, the Grand Canyon? And I found this remarkable view on the Desert Tower. I spent 36 hours capturing this image. That's actually moonlight on the left side of the image. So imagine when I do a digital picture like this, understand it's a 1 hour exposure. So in order to see, for 1 hour, I'm taking a picture as the moon. If the moon goes behind a cloud, it ruins my picture. If for some reason there's a technical glitch, I bang the camera, I have to wait 1 hour before I see if I have a technical glitch. So it's a 2 hour process. And by that time, the moon's in a different position. So you can see how many variables could happen where things could go wrong when I do these photographs. This is Yellowstone. I was in, there's this incredible hotel, the Yellowstone Inn. It's a historical hotel. I got access to, it's like a cupola. It's called the Bird's Nest, and it's been closed for about 13 years. And they actually allowed me to be up there for 36 hours. And so I got very intimate with Old Faithful over 36 hours. But if you look closely at this image, and this is the thing about my work, when you look at, if you see, it looks like a clock face almost, like a half a clock face. If your eye moves from the left side towards up the path, you'll actually see the shadows rotate in my image based on time. And of course, the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. This, I was in a crane for 18 hours. Again, I can't even tell you how lucky you have to be. If you've ever tried to see the cherry blossoms, you know that for the most part, just to get them, to see them physically open is a miracle, right? If you get booked a hotel and everything. Imagine trying to book a 130-foot crane, have it delivered when all the roads are shut down. I mean, the variables that we go through to make these pictures sometimes are
I know you've had instances where you arrive at a location and the circumstances don't allow you to shoot, whether it's weather, danger, or something like that. Have you ever had, I never asked you this, have you ever had a situation where you spent the 18 hours or 36 hours and then didn't use the picture? Yeah,
twice, yeah.
What were those?
Well, the one, and sometimes I show it, sometimes people like to see my mistakes. But it's like, yes, I do make mistakes. The truth is I shot the Grand Canyon, and I shot in this very famous, and it's a striking image, it would have been a striking image. It's the horseshoe that this Japanese architect built over the Indian side, and so people walk, literally they float above it. And I just felt like the architecture of this thing that he created overpowered the natural beauty of the Grand Canyon. And I decided that's not the image I want to make of the Grand Canyon. So that was one.
So then when you redid it, was that a few days later or months later?
Oh, no, it was about 3 or 4 weeks later, yeah. Okay. So we found the location.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So we're now...
so moving on, sort of it's the same kind of thing about purpose, but now, you pivoted once again, to sort of within the image, you're discovering wildlife and what kind of stories you can share about the changing world. Exactly,
and what was so exciting was at this point, after I had started doing the natural pictures of the parks, I started to realize that I could maybe shoot other things. I was getting away from cities, so I started to think about wildlife, and I've always wanted to capture the Great Migration in the Serengeti. And so I had this crazy idea to go to the Serengeti and do this picture, and We actually went together with a group of friends. Many of them are here tonight. We spent about 4 weeks. And of course, the whole trip, I was always looking and shooting. But in the back of my mind, I knew I was going to do this day to night. And so I did it. And this is the location I found. They allowed me to go inside the park, which is off-road. And this is what is literally the center of the Serengeti. I was in this vehicle, it's a crocodile blind, and I spent 26 hours in this blind. I never slept. 26 hours of photographing. And it was something I'll never forget. It was a life-changing experience. Because what I witnessed, this is the photograph I made. What I witnessed was all of these extraordinary animals sharing a watering hole. It was during a 5-week drought. So the animals were very stressed. They weren't migrating in the normal ways they normally do. And I watched them all gather into this watering hole and drink and bathe. And nobody even grunted. Nobody made a sound. They seemed to understand something that we don't, that this water, this idea of water is something we all share. We all have to share. When you come out of the water, you're fair game. But when you're in the water, I don't touch you. And that's the way they are. And that's the way they communicate. And it really changed almost, I think, a level of my consciousness, to be frank. You know, we all talk about consciousness, like we grow up a certain way, we're taught certain things, and we frame the world in that way. But what I've discovered through this work is that I get to see these animals and I get to see a level of communication, and it is opening my consciousness into the way they see the world and the way they feel about nature and the way everything is connected within our planet. And that's really what I've tried to do in my work now is show that connection, try to make people have a sense of awe and raise a level of consciousness. So here was National Geographic commissioned me, right, to do the Lake Gregoria bird migration. And this was a whole series I did on migration of the birds. And we built this blind in the middle of Lake Gregoria. This is about a 5-hour drive from Nairobi in Kenya. And these are not nesting birds. So it's a very challenging thing to create a photograph like what I do over time when you're dealing with non-nesting birds. But I was very fortunate to get this picture. This was 36 hours of photographing.
Maybe explain that this is unusual and that day is at the bottom. And
yes.
night.
So basically what happened here is in the bottom of the photograph, you see these marabou storks. They are actually the natural predator. And so you'll see them in the front of the picture, and then if you look in the back, you see a whole family. And these guys are like velociraptors. I mean, they communicate, they are really, what they call, they hunt in packs. And they were, every hour on the hour, they would attack these birds. And so what happens is, as time changed, I kept getting photographs where there were no birds. They would be attacked, leave, land again. So it allowed me to change time through this entire photograph. And what you're looking at above here, which is really wild, is here you can see this is the morning light. And you notice the color change, and this is one single moment. At 5:30 in the afternoon, the birds were attacked by the storks in the front and the back. And so 100,000 birds took off. And when I caught that moment, I said, okay, that's definitely gonna be in the picture. You know, that's one I could never change.
But this is also an example of a situation where in real time you had to make a decision about how the vector was gonna.
Yeah, I did. I made a real-time decision, but also I think what was interesting about this photograph was without climate change, I don't make this picture. Because you see the fresh water and notice the green hills? It's never green this time of year. I was there during the dead of dry season. But because we had thunderstorms every night at 9:30, I had fresh water in the foreground of my picture. And one thing I do is a lot of research when I do these pictures. And I found out that lesser known flamingos, boy, they love eating this diatomaceous, volcanic like water that you and I would get so sick over, you'd be in a hospital. But when it comes to bathing, they love fresh water. So I had a hunch if I built my blind right on the edge of the freshwater stream, the birds would ignore me, and they did. And then I went to a place called Bass Rock, and this was 36 hours, literally in their nests in this remote island off the coast of Scotland. Crazy place. And then this is a little video to give you an idea of what my life is like when I go to these places. This is one of the most remote islands in the Falkland, the southern furthest most island in the Falkland chain. It's called Steeple Jason, and I'm there to photograph. And when I literally 50 people maybe on Earth have ever set foot on in this place, and I'm there to photograph the black-browed albatross, just an extraordinarily beautiful bird, a bird that can fly 5,000 miles to feed its young. And this is the largest nesting colony in the world for these birds. And so there I am, this is what I do. That's tussock. I'm in the middle of a tussock field, and I was actually standing on top of a tussock bush because I didn't even have a ladder to get the perspective I wanted. And then my assistant, he filmed this, because nobody believes my pictures sometimes. They go, well, there's never a rainbow there, right? That never happened. But it did happen. And that's what I, lived with. I mean, I had birds flying over my ears. It was just extraordinary. But this is the photograph. It was just, a mystical experience.
Incredible.
And one of the things I get to do is, like a scientist, I get to study and see these things and see the way these birds communicate with one another, see their mating rituals. All of this stuff is part of my work. So then I went to Nebraska.
Yes.
And these are the sandhill cranes migration, which I say to everyone, if you've never been to Nebraska, know that this is one of the most magnificent things in all the places I've ever gone in my life. I've never seen anything like this. It is awe-inspiring. So if you can do it, put it on your bucket list.
And so all of these migration shots were for Nat Geo?
For Nat Geo, yeah.
And
this was a big story.
In the magazine.
They appeared, and they were gatefolds in the magazine, yeah. So it was one of my friends who spent his entire life photographing this species and who helped me on this, Michael Forsberg. Michael said to me, so Stephen, how many weeks are they going to give you? I go, weeks? It's called day to night. They give me, I did probably 36 hours. He goes, he goes, good luck. It's like that kind of thing. And I was, again, very lucky. And then the work pivoted.
This was incredible, yeah.
Canada. This is the first image I did in Canada. This is a place called Ropes and Bite. It's the only place in the world where orca whales come for a spa treatment. So there are rocks that exist in this area where these orca families come in and they rub on these rocks. And I gave a TED Talk in 2016, and a gentleman came up to me and said, you have to come where I work. And I go, where do you work? He goes, I work for this group called CETUS, and we actually protect this area called Ropes and Bite. He says, it's the most incredible place. It's where whales come for the spa treatment, and you have cruise ships, and you have fishing boats, and you have, kayakers, and you have every known wildlife. It's, bald eagles, seals, you name it, everything there. And I went and I witnessed this, and this is 36 hours. I never slept. It was one of the most magical experiences I've ever had. And then I loved Canada so much that I realized that Canada was almost like a laboratory to tell the story of endangered species and habitats. And so again, I created a photograph to pitch the society with on giving me a grant. And this is the one I did. So this is a place, this is called Bella Coola. And Bella Coola is part of the up northern area of Canada. And it's one of the most remarkable areas where grizzly bears live, and they feed along this river. And you get the whole story, I think, of how a species engages within an environment, I think, in this picture. And that's really what I'm trying to show you, is that I'm trying to show you that while you could necessarily, the species may not be endangered, but if the environment is endangered, it endangers the species. And so when the salmon don't run through this area, the impact is huge on these grizzly bears.
I think this is also, that picture is a great example of when you zoom in, as you just did, and see some of those details. I feel like every time if you guys can look in the gallery in the back, when you get really close, each time you look at the overall image, you see something you didn't see before. It's like these little gifts that you can uncover, which I really think is part of it.
It's all about looking, My work has always been about seeing. And so I want you to look. And what I try to do is, the more you want to look, the more I'm going to give you something to look at. And it's about experiencing something and experiencing a place. And my hope is that when you look at something like this, that it touches you emotionally in a way.
Sure.
And when it does do that, that's when I think it becomes part of your the potential to act on that emotion becomes a very important element for me, and that's what I hope people do when they look at my pictures.
Absolutely, and then there's also just sort of more the surface delight in discovering, oh look, there's a fish in the bear's mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's almost, I don't know, some people say like my work is childlike, and it is. I have a childlike sort of enthusiasm to discover the world, and I still have it. And I think part of the joy I get is to be in these places and to try to capture the things, the sense of awe and wonder and beauty that I witness through these pictures, and try to give it to you, like allow you to see it the way I'm seeing it, you know. I try to create a perspective in my photographs. Like when you look at my prints, it almost feels like you're there.
You're in it.
That's a very conscious thing. I'm trying to really create an image that is the way the human eye sees. It's not just using a camera lens, you know. I'm actually thinking about the way your peripheral vision is, the way you look at depth, and it's all about seeing for me. This was one of the really extraordinary moments for me, was trying to capture the polar bears in Churchill, Manitoba during a full moonrise. Just extraordinary. And again, telling the story, I was there, it was very warm, and then we had a sudden cold snap, but you can see the green, that's melted ice. If the area is not fully frozen, these bears don't cross, and if they don't cross, they can't feed. And then this image,
This
which
one's really important.
which I self-assigned really, July 2019. If many remember that Greenland was having a massive ice, it became known as the Great July Melt. I happened to be there when it happened. And I made this photograph, and initially when I made the picture, I thought, well, this is going to be a picture about climate change and about sea level rise, really. But what I witnessed really informed me in a unique way, like so many of these experiences do. I watched as all these humpback whales were gorging on food. I'd never seen so many whales in my life. And what I realized was when the ice was being melting, it was releasing sediment, and through the sediment was feeding these plankton, and the plankton were exploding from the sediment for eating. And then when the plankton exploded, the krill exploded, eating the plankton. And when the krill exploded, guess who got like a smorgasbord of food? The humpback whales. These guys were coming out of the water, and literally the krill was just flowing out of their mouths. I've never seen anything like it. And I realized that, my God, ice is the beginning of the food chain in our oceans. And if there's no ice, what happens to the oceans? What happens to that chain effect? And that was kind of an aha moment for me, you know. And I think that's what the power of observation does. It informs you in a way, you know, in a very deep way.
Absolutely.
So then,
yeah, so this is interesting. While many of us were doing absolutely nothing for several years, Stephen was doing a lot. And though we're not going to talk about it, I did want to note that you did a series in Vanity Fair of essential workers, many of whom, or all of whom, were Westport essential workers. Yeah, and
some of them maybe even be here tonight.
During the
friends
pandemic,
from Golds, and
really...
Zane Saul was one of the doctors who's working with COVID patients in Bridgeport. And it was kind of an amazing piece. I wanted to do reflect on what was happening in my life. They asked me to do they wanted like, oh, show us what you're doing, like some kind of like, and I said, no, I want to photograph essential workers, and ended up doing this series of my hometown heroes, and it was special.
It's really beautiful. So this is like an interesting, another pivot, if you will.
Yeah.
Where you started to get more interested in social issues, and of course that was a time that was ripe with all kinds of social issues. We had George Floyd being murdered on video, and so many things going on with in particular with the Black Lives Matter, and so there was this and then we had this massive pandemic that was killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, and so I started to, through inspiration again. This was Peter Bruegel, the son of Jan Bruegel, and he had painted the Black Plague. And I realized that, it was through art that people really tell that story, you have a memory of really what happened. And so in looking at that, I realized that I wanted to start using my technique. And yeah, it was kind of scary because I was going to places that were, right.
I was exposed, but I thought it was too important not to do. It was too important not to cover. So I remember seeing Reverend Al Sharpton speaking at George Floyd's funeral during his eulogy, and he spoke about having a march on Washington, 50 years to the day when Dr. King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And at that moment, I knew I have to be there to take this picture. This is going to be a seminal moment in history. And so I approached National Geographic. They got totally behind the idea. Reverend Sharpton, loved the idea. And I brought everybody together, literally. And they allowed me, the Parks Department, which this would never happen normally, but they allowed me to be in a crane for 18 hours. There I am. And it was about 110 degrees. And this is the photograph I made. And if you look, again, the details of this picture, it tells the story of this moment in history. Look at the signs. It was a day of, I want to say, love, because there was all talk that there were going to be riots, there was going to be fighting, that people were going to, and it was none of that. There were grandchildren, grandparents, people came out to be a part of this day in history, to really reflect and make their thoughts heard to our government and speak out about what was happening in our world. And so I captured this unique moment in history.
But at that point, you had already shot the Obama inauguration.
Yes.
So that was sort of in the same vein in terms of politics.
Exactly. And that led me, really to this photograph. So here was the Obama inauguration that Stacy just mentioned, and that was in 2013, and I had an extraordinary view to be able to do this. And then, of course, so Obama inauguration, 2013, and then Joe Biden becomes president. And of course, it's the middle of COVID. And there was 800,000 people in this picture. And in this picture, there's 200,000 flags. And I pitched the idea to the Geographic, and I was working with the Biden administration Arts Council, and they gave me permission to do this picture from the same view I did the original Obama inauguration. And it was probably the hardest single photograph I've almost had to ever make, because this was obviously after January 6th. There was a real threat in that area. I'm not a war photographer, but all my war photographers said that they had never seen Washington like this, except it totally reminded them of the Green Zone in Iraq. That's what it was like. So I had no idea how I was getting into my location. I had no idea how I was getting out of my location. And all I know is that I had one of the Texas National Guard was behind me all day. And those guys had my back. I had, flak jackets. I had a guy, that Disney assigned to me, who's basically watching me, because I was called a soft target because I'm in a crane for, 18 hours. And the inauguration ended at 1, but my day didn't end. And one of the things you look up, if you look in this picture closely, in the darkness of the clouds, that is the presidential helicopter, Air Force One, leaving. So I literally have the former President Trump leaving, that he actually flew out as the clouds were leaving, and he's in my photograph.
Can you talk about, in the context of all of these pictures, these are obviously examples where you couldn't say, you know what, I'm going to shoot it tomorrow. What happens when you have a day that is the only day that you can do it?
Not only is it not shooting tomorrow, but National Geographic commissions me and they say, by the way, Stephen, this is going to be in the year-end in pictures. So that's a little bit of pressure. Usually the year-end in pictures are pictures that are shot already, that have been judged through countless edits, and then they get chosen as the picture of the year. So they were kind of assigning me the year-end in picture, which is a great show of confidence to me, but also a huge, responsibility to come back with a photograph. And so that was part of it. But yeah, absolutely. Shooting history is something that I just,
How is your mindset different when you're shooting something like that?
Well, I think I just go about it very methodically, and I just stay open. And I don't let anything, dampen my enthusiasm, because, you could have a bad moment of weather, but things can change.
Right.
It could be windy, but things can change. When I shot the Biden's inauguration photograph, I had 40-mile-an-hour winds blowing me constantly. I mean, constantly. So if I didn't have the technology I have now with these higher speeds and the digital backs and stuff, I never could have done that picture. So, I try to make the best of a bad situation, but I'm really focused, and I'm trying to deliver. But it is a mindset, But I got to say, whenever I do these pictures, once I commit, I'm the dog that you can't get the bone out of his mouth. I mean, you know. This is Miami Beach, day to night. Of course, I wanted to do a picture for years. And of course, COVID opened up something for me. This is the first time that Ocean Avenue never allowed cars. And so I was able to get this unique view. I was about 70 feet in the air in a crane for about 18 hours to do this picture. And it was on Halloween, on a full moon. And then this is the Fagdasal, I can't pronounce it. I'm just going to say the Iceland volcano that erupted. And I pitched the magazine on doing a Nat Geo a piece on the volcano day to night. And they loved the idea. And then they sent out a film crew to, so this is kind of what it was like. So you guys get an idea of what it's like when I get to a place. My kids saw this and thought, like, God, Dad, you're really cool.
Or crazy.
That's the mountain. That's it, right? This is the spot you want to be on. Yeah. You can see into the crater.
I do 3D modeling to study a location before I decide where I'm going to shoot.
I think, you know, if this is the ridge that we're looking at, right? This would be my shooting.
My concept day to night is really about capturing time in a single photograph. For me, I always like to get elevation because when I change time, it's really important that I have a certain type of perspective. But also, it is it's exciting when you get at a certain perspective. You're able to see into things in a way that I find is very, very rich. Well, let's start with the 90. Let's start with the 90. 90 first. We watch the light change. We watch things that happen. There's nothing automated about it. My eyes kind of scanning it, moving it. I'm capturing very specific moments.
Wow, look at that. Look at that. Is that a tornado? What the hell is that? Wow, that's crazy.
Best camping spot in the world.
So we're all set up here on top of really this incredible, extraordinary view that we have looking at the volcano. The winds are quite stiff, so it's going to be a cold night. It's been a challenge, you know. Certainly, this volcanoes are not they're unlike anything I've ever shot, you know, in terms of predictability. I think that if my work is so much about embracing sort of uncertainty and fear, and this is certainly one of those situations where we're embracing it all, and hopefully we're going to walk away with something very special.
And this is what we walked away with. Yeah. And, you know, it literally went off almost every 8 minutes. And I had done a time lapse, and a scientist, a geologist, saw the time lapse and actually wanted to study it because they believe the day I filmed, over 26 hours, something like that, was the most active single day of the volcano.
Lucky.
And then you can see that's the scale. Those are two actual hikers on the edge. Gives you an idea of just how massive this thing is. So that where they're standing, they can't even see the volcano. The flow itself is almost 2 stories high. So it's pretty crazy. And then finally, this is, let me go back one. Oh, no, can I go back, or it's not going back?
I'm not sure.
Well, that last one was, let me see if this works. Oh yeah, okay, great. So this is a shot that I've never had to photograph a picture about death before, day to night. But the Geographic commissioned me to do, a wonderful artist named Susan Furstenberg created a thing called In America. And she, at a time when we all couldn't mourn, and we had lost almost 700,000 people to COVID, she created this unique exhibit right in front of the Washington Monument, taking over all acres of the entire front lawn, and all white flags representing people who had died from COVID. And then she invited the people who lost loved ones to actually write something, a memory, on the flag itself. And so I found this view, and I wanted to tell this story. And you know, when you look at it, I saw, you know, people on their knees, people reflecting. It was just really beautiful and very meaningful. And I think that it's just an important moment in our history to capture. And And now the most recent work, really, this is the current issue, the September issue of National Geographic, is a series I just did on America the Beautiful, it's called. And this is really a story about the 30 for 30 initiative, which deals with fresh water, our oceans, and land in protecting them. And the hope is to take 30% of all of those three elements and preserve them by 2030. And so Geographic asked me to capture 4 places in America that really need to be saved. And so the first one I did was this place called Bears Ears, which was just extraordinary. It's a place called the Citadel. It's Bears Ears National Monument, so it's not a national park. It's actually controlled by the Navajo Nation, and it has a unique history to their culture. And so I photographed there in really challenging conditions. It was about a 1-hour hike with 70-pound backpacks. This was my shoot day, which was on Easter Sunday. It was also on Passover, and it was also on Ramadan. And that happens every 33 years. And it also happened to be during the planetary alignment, where 4 planets were visible during a full moon rise. So this is what my conditions were like. I camped out for almost 3 days in that wind, and that's why it looks so beautiful, the shape of it. But this is the photograph that you see, and as you go into it, you can really see this incredible detail that I witnessed as time changed. I used the Citadel as a spine, and as you can see the actual planetary alignment above the moon.
So Stephen, because we're running long,
Yes.
and I want to give people some time to ask questions.
Sure.
Can we go
Want to
through
jump
the
right
other
to
couple and do Tapestries?
Yeah, let's do Tapestries. This is another one, and then this is another one I did. Of course, this is Montana, the JL Bar Ranch, and then this is a city scene protecting our cities. That's in New Orleans. So yeah,
So
Tapestries.
Is National Geographic running each of those as a different cover?
No, they're all
within the same-
gatefolds. The cover is Bears Ears, but then it appears as a gatefold
Okay,
as
so
well.
they're all in one issue?
They're all in one issue, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Is that issue available?
Yes, it is right now. I think it's on the newsstands now.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to, this is such a different body of work, but I feel like it's important to show it, and I didn't want to end.
No, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm sorry we're running a little late, guys.
I think it's just another example of how you push the envelope, that you don't just say, okay, I'm great at this, and I'm going to do nothing else. Like your curiosity is always pushing.
Yeah, I'm curious about a lot of things, and it starts with seeing, but with it's also about emotion for me. When I go out, and especially during COVID, I would walk like many of us do, go for these long walks, and I was home for the seasons. I never been home for the seasons, and I started exploring a few years ago. This is 8 years ago. I started this project. I started using a camera that I could make multiple exposures on. And so I would take these fleeting moments over the course of 4 to 8 seconds, all in camera. And I started to look at multiple perspectives. And what I was really exploring was the way, when you walk into a scene and you see a place, you don't realize it, but our rapid eye movement is contextualizing where you are in space and what you are feeling at a given moment. And so I started to explore that concept, what I think is really the basis for Impressionism, really, in a still photograph. And so I started doing it in Italy. This was in Venice. Some of the work was done with an iPhone, believe it or not. And I started to really get excited about this. My son Sam is this.
I love this. I love this story that Stephen and Betty's son Sam is a musician, a very talented musician. And I think the quote was something about that day to night is your symphony.
Yes.
And this is sort of more like your jazz riff.
Exactly.
If you will.
This is jazz, because it's like really fast, it's fleeting, it's very, very free, and it's very, very liberating. This is the beautiful Lake Mohegan. I go for hikes there. This is from Lake Mohegan. This is right out my, front of my driveway during spring again. So it's, again, it's about creating these multiple dimensions almost the way your eye sees, but layering them on top of a sensor. And it just gives you this, I'm excited about the work. I feel that it's opened me up to a whole new way, but it's fractional time. It is related to time. I'm really shooting fractional time here.
Well, honestly, this has all been, I knew a lot of this, and it's still been incredibly interesting to me, so I hope everyone has really enjoyed learning more about Stephen's work. I encourage you to...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Stacy. This is great. Well, we're happy to take some questions. Does anybody has any questions?
Yeah, I think there's a microphone in the back if people have questions over there.
If you have a question for Stephen, please come to the microphone right here.
I also just wanted to note while people are making their way to the microphone that you should look at Stephen's website. There's a lot more material there to check out. We were hoping to show maybe the trailer to a film that he directed. He actually can do like everything. Incredible film about Jay Maisel, who, as we talked about earlier, called Jane Myself, which is absolutely extraordinary. So I encourage you, you can watch it on
It's
lots
on
of places,
all
Netflix.
Amazon, and it's not on Netflix, but it's on Amazon, and it's on a bunch of all the streamers.
Okay, questions?
Two-part question for you, please. Can you tell us technically the type of equipment you use to capture the images, as well as the software and hardware used to construct some of your imagery?
So I work, mostly I work with, and they don't pay me for this, but it's a Linhof camera. I work with a Linhof, and it's like a Master Technica, so it's like a 4x5 camera. And then I use 150 megapixel back. And then the images are all constructed with using a very large and basically a Ferrari Apple computer that we have to, constantly upgrade because of the scale and size of my files. And we work with Photoshop. And I work with a lot of these companies now because I kind of like, the scale of what I'm doing is so big. I'm, if they can get the machine to work with my work, then they can work for anybody's work.
Exactly.
So,
thank you.
Sure.
Hi, thank you. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you.
Have you ever put yourself in these large composite photos? Because there's so much going on, I have to imagine that
Good
either
question.
you or your
Very
team
good, yeah. So you remember,
in there.
yeah, so that's a great question. So the Paris one, I am in that one. That's the only one I'm in. That's my, what is it, my Where's Waldo moment or my Hitchcock moment, yeah. I'm in that one. Yeah. So now the question is, you got to find me next time. That's a good question, yeah.
Any other questions? Yep, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. You've exhausted us with the authenticity, the brilliance of your work. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
You mentioned your use of technology, computers. You've talked about from Photoshop and then your own digital work. Talk to us, Stephen, about the threat of the latest wave of artificial intelligence that is actually generating the next generation of images. And this is very threatening to professional artists as yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Philip. Thank you. I think it's a very scary time right now for a lot of artists. It's an exciting time, but it's a scary time. So it's a very strange feeling when AI, and I've actually been exploring working with DALL-E 2, it's called, and there's another one called Midjourney. And these are AI machines that are learning at a speed that is just staggering. And all art is based on inspiration, right? And just imagine you could use a prompt through language of words to describe an idea. And this machine can literally reference every known thing that was ever created based on your words. And it can sample it and then create something out of those ones and zeros and create a photographic looking image out of that. So yes, it is scary. And also there are all kinds of rights issues that go with that, because the machine is going to sample my work at some point, right? It's going to sample, people are going to use artists' names to describe the things they'd like it to look like. So I know artists that are trying to get ahead of it, and they're just putting all their stuff out there and saying, yeah, go ahead, use my stuff, and then, well, the machine will know it's me, and then maybe, there'll be some type of law that says, wait a second, if you sell that or use it as an ad and it's my technique or my, it's using elements of my work or looks like my style, how is that going to be defend it in a way? I don't know. I think these are all really challenging questions. But I will say this. I think people were afraid of Photoshop when it first came out. Now this is next level. But I do think it is another exciting tool. One of the areas I've been interested in is, my son being a musician, is there's a woman who just gave a recent TED Talk, and she's literally created her own voice through AI. So you and I could sing and sound like her. Like literally sound like her. Sing any song we want and we can sound exactly like she does. And so you start thinking about, well, my God, you could sample anything and then create so there's all kinds of exciting elements to this technology, but it's also, there've got to be some kind of laws put into place, because right now, I feel like the machine is learning at such an incredible speed. Just if you guys, I'd recommend, if you're curious about this, go on Facebook and look at Midjourney, become a member, and go on DALL-E 2 and inform yourself. Look at what people are doing on it. It's pretty staggering. And how quickly it's changing and how quickly it's learning.
Great question.
Great question, Philip.
So much for coming out and showing those amazing images. Thank you so much. And for everybody in the audience, thank you for coming, and I hope to see you at more events soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.